Please be warned. Inspired by a true story deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
December 7th, 2003. A beloved young boy sets off to take a bus ride on a journey to buy his parents Christmas presents and is never seen alive again. In 2022, Joel Edgerton and Sean Harris starred in a film that focuses on the police investigation that led to that perpetrator's eventual arrest, which left the family of the victim in complete disdain. An incredible tale that seems almost impossible, yet The Stranger was indeed inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is Inspired by a True Story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. We're going to discuss the overall details of the actual crimes. Then later, we'll review the film on its own, how much of that's true and how much was Hollywood magic. You can find all episodes at thehollywoodoutsiders.com, or you can share your thoughts on this episode or suggest a film by emailing us at inspired@thehollywoodoutsiders.com. And of course, we're in whatever podcast app you listen to. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website. And joining me today are my fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, buddy.
And Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
And Amanda is still kind of upset about having to watch this movie, apparently.
Yeah, it was a little disrespectful to force this upon us.
What? I wouldn't go that far.
The movie was, I get it. It's a very bleak topic, but the whole movie was just very bleak and slow. And it was over 2 hours about a child rapist. I feel like I just didn't need that much time with the slow burn.
Well, you've got a lot of spoilers all in there. I'm just saying, like, hey.
Yeah.
Sorry about it.
Sorry about it. This is not a fun topic, by the way. It's a crazy story, true. The actual true story behind the movie is far more fascinating, I think, than the film is. And I don't mean fascinating
100%.
in a good way. It's interesting what happened, how the perpetrator was brought to justice, how everything kind of, if you can really call that being brought to justice, I guess. And also there's a lot of debate about if it was the right thing to do, which we'll get to. I want to get into it. So as of this recording, The Stranger is streaming on Netflix, but that is always subject to change. New episodes, again, are found every 2 weeks, so they can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at The Hollywood Outsider. And you can hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/The Hollywood Outsider. Before we begin the details of everything that happened, did you guys know this story before you saw the film?
No, this is the very first time I've heard anything about this story. And I'm glad, because I was glad to be able to sit in the movie and experience it as it's happening, to then later be able to look into the actual events.
So it took you by surprise then, you would say?
Yeah, absolutely. I did not know what was going to happen with the story. I didn't know at the beginning where they were going until it started laying out the tracks of what it is that's happening. And they did so, to me, at least, in a very interesting way.
I didn't know anything about this story. I did figure out the topic very quickly in watching the movie, and assumed that that's kind of the direction we were going to go. Just, there were a lot of really weird moments. And, I mean, the real story incorporates quite a lot of weird moments as well. So don't get me wrong. I think it's holding true to how creepy this original content is, if you will. But it's just a really sad one. It's just a really gross, nasty one to sit with.
So you've been forewarned. Amanda has done the sales pitch of a lifetime for true crime podcasts. Well, just so you know, film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true their true crime is. So prepare yourself. The warning at the beginning is very, very true for this particular topic and most that we talk about. So prepare yourself for a horrific tale with one hell of a twist. This is the truth behind The Stranger. On 9/11/2001, Daniel Morcombe was born on December 19th, 1989, and was one of 3 boys in his family. 15-year-old Dean and 13-year-olds Daniel and Bradley were twins. He was known as a quiet, shy boy who was thought to be a kind, thoughtful young man. He was developing into someone special. He spent most of his time either with his brother Bradley, his German Shepherd Chief, or with his pony. Yeah, he had a pony. And he eventually wanted to become a vet. His heart was in animals, as well as his family. On December 7th, 2003, Daniel's parents were at a Christmas party when Daniel decided he wanted to head to the Sunshine Plaza shopping center with his twin brother Bradley to grab Christmas presents for their parents, Bruce and Denise Morcombe. Maybe get a haircut. Bradley decided against it. He just wasn't up to it. So Daniel headed to Sunshine Plaza on his own. Daniel normally took a bus to head to the Sunshine Plaza at an unmarked bus stop, approximately 1 kilometer from his home at an underpass on Keel Mountain Road. This area was known as the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, a state in northern Australia. What Daniel couldn't tell is that his bus had broken down along the way. Another bus was therefore ordered to take its spot, and as Daniel awaited his bus, another bus eventually came by, and Daniel repeatedly tried to flag him down. This driver remembered seeing Daniel at the bus stop, but his orders were to pick up no passengers, as this bus was a replacement for the broken-down bus. So he drove past Daniel, to much chagrin from other passengers, and radioed for the next bus to be sure to pick up Daniel. He stated that he indicated to Daniel as he drove by that another bus was on its way, to which another passenger again raised concern about leaving a boy stranded alone. Another bus did come by 3 minutes later, and at this time, Daniel Morcombe was no longer at this bus stop. Daniel Morcombe had disappeared. He was gone. When Bruce and Denise returned from their Christmas party, they learned that Daniel was not back yet, and they also learned about this broken bus situation. So they searched the route and the area, and they found no trace of Daniel. They immediately reported Daniel as missing, and an alert was put out. They were ordered to return home in case Daniel returned. He did not. And the search for Daniel was on. Flyers, TV spots, search parties, you name it. There were witnesses who claimed that an adult male was seen talking to a young boy. Also, presumably, the man was waiting for the bus at the same time. Both a blue sedan and a white four-wheel drive SUV in the area were sighted. A woman allegedly reported seeing an adult male punching something in the back seat of this blue sedan, but she had no more detailed information. Police were under intense pressure to identify this mysterious man, and the Morcombes never stopped looking. It was an absolute mystery. Bradley and Daniel's 14th birthdays passed. Christmas passed. Daniel was still nowhere to be found. By the end of 2004, Queensland government offered a $250,000 reward, the biggest in Queensland's history, for information that would lead to the return of Daniel or point directly at whomever was responsible for his absence. 8,000 calls flooded the police, most of it being false information. Years passed. Another $750,000 was anonymously donated, and still nothing. Known pedophiles were rounded up. Even a false confession was delivered, but nothing led to an arrest. It was assumed Daniel Morcombe was murdered, but no one could tell what actually happened to him. Daniel Morcombe, sadly, would go unavenged. Fast forward to March 31st, 2011, and Brett Peter Cowan. Born on September 18th, 1969, to Marlene and Peter Cowan, Cowan was seen as a simpleton, nothing special about him, and his father suffered from extreme PTSD due to his tour in Vietnam. Brett Peter Cowan was proud of his assaults on children, bragging about them, starting when he was 10. He boasted that he had abused over 30 children at one point, only suggesting that he had no idea this was wrong until he was much older. He was also known to torture animals and lizards and was an avid drug user. He was 18 when he was first convicted for sexual assault, having grabbed a 7-year-old boy and abused him in a local restroom. He fled the area, but he was caught and later convicted and sentenced to 2 years. Then in 1993, a 6-year-old that Cowan encountered was attacked by Cowan, and he attacked him in a car, cutting his legs and chest, and he actually left him to die. But the boy lived. He escaped, and he went to the authorities, though he was too traumatized to name his assailant. Cowan even joined the search party for the assaulter, but thankfully, a DNA match from the car pointed directly to Cowan. He blamed his drug abuse, but he was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He only served 3.5 years, and then he was released and moved to the Sunshine Coast, claiming to be clean of his debauchery. He joined a church where they were unaware of his crimes against children. And there, allegedly, Cowan attempted to rape a 15-year-old. There were no charges filed, as some claim the church covered it up. Cowan went on to marry and have children of his own. They divorced, and he lost custody of those children. He also had a car that matched the description of the car spotted at the bus stop, the white SUV. Cowan claimed he just drove past when police interviewed him. He voluntarily gave a DNA sample, his photo, and allowed his car to be examined. He denied his involvement, and even went so far to say that Daniel wasn't even his type. He was too old. No evidence was found. Nothing existed. But police did determine he did have 45 free minutes that they could not explain. Sadly, they could not convict Cowan. The evidence just was not there. But the pressure was on, and Cowan felt it, so he left the area. He was free to return home and boarded a flight back to Perth, Australia. On this flight, he met Joe Emery, a career criminal. For the next several hours, Emery and Brett Cowan became fast friends. Cowan later changed his name legally to Shadow Nunya Hunter in order to evade authorities. Because yeah, that'll fool the cops. But we will continue to refer to him by his birth name. Cowan was destitute and needed money, so Emery introduced him to Paul Fitzgerald, aka Fitzy. He ran a local gang in Perth, Australia. The gang had a strict code, but the crimes committed were pimping, drug dealing, bribing, gun running, loan sharking, and a lot more. All committed by Brett Cowan for Fitzy. Cowan proved himself loyal, and with that loyalty came more money and bigger jobs. He was becoming a respected member of the gang, and the memory of Daniel Morcombe's investigation was long gone. He was past it. Then one night, Fitzy picked Cowan up and met with Craig, a corrupt cop they used. Craig mentioned at this meeting that Brisbane was subpoenaing Cowan very soon, and they needed to prepare for it. Fitzy needed to know what this was about, and he insisted that Cowan cannot lie about this or we cannot fix it. Nor can you take part in $1 million job that was right around the corner. Cowan told Fitzy there was nothing to worry about. He had an airtight alibi. Fitzy acknowledged it and moved on. Days later, Cowan admitted to Fitzy that he changed his name to avoid this investigation. Cowan was set up for this $1 million job, and he could not afford to withhold anything that could upend the operation, especially if Fitzy felt he could make this case go away forever. And that meant a trip to see Arnold, They went to the presidential suite at the Hyatt Hotel and met with Arnold, the man at the head of the gang. The Godfather, in effect. Arnold was very clear. If there was something he needed to know, they could fix it, but he needed to be straight. Arnold was concerned. We gotta walk before we run, we gotta crawl before we walk, in his words. And his information was clear. You were involved in the murder of Daniel Morcombe, and if we do not clear this up, you cannot take part in this $1 million job. You're nothing but a liability. Arnold stated, I don't care what you've done. All I'm looking for is loyalty, respect, and honesty. But he needed Cowan to explain his part in all of this. Well, Brett Cowan insisted he had nothing to do with Daniel's disappearance. Plainly, clearly. Arnold reiterated that he pays a hefty amount for information, and he has confirmed the police have proof that you killed Daniel Morcombe, and they are coming to arrest you. Arnold stated that he can make this go away, but not until Cowan is clear with him. Arnold needed Cowan for this job, but he could not deal with the baggage of the police hanging around. At first, Brett Cowan denied any culpability. Arnold was insistent. Then you cannot take part in this job. It's too risky with this hanging over their shoulders. Tell him what happened, where the body is buried, we'll get rid of it and bury the case. His boys told him he's loyal, so it's worth paying off whomever he needs to take care of this. But first, Cowan has to talk. So Cowan did. He admitted to killing Daniel Morcombe. He gave the facts of the crimes. He stated he was headed to his boss's father's place to pick up a mulcher, and on the way home, he saw the broken down bus and saw Daniel on the side of the road. He thought he was, quote, fucking cute. He had a white four-wheel drive, but did not park it nearby. He parked it at his local church. The bus drove by, and Cowan stated he offered Daniel a ride to the shopping plaza, to which Daniel accepted. Once he got Daniel in the car, Cowan took him to a wooded area about a half an hour away, to an abandoned house. Cowan claimed he attempted to assault him, but Daniel fought for his life, and Cowan said that he panicked and choked Daniel to death in an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. He then put Daniel, or should I say Daniel's body, in the back of his car next to the mulcher. Cowan stated that the house is now gone, but then he drove 150 miles to a sand mining site where he disposed of Daniel's body by throwing it into a nearby creek where he floated away. He later went back to find Daniel's body and found some bones, but the rest of him was gone. Cowan then buried what was left. Arnold assigned Fitzy and a few other guys to head back to this area with Cowan and find this body so they could properly dispose of it and ensure Cowan was free and clear. On August 13th, 2011, Cowan led these men to a location on Kings Road by the Glass House Mountains. It was roughly half an hour away from that original underpass Daniel disappeared from. Cowan remembered exactly where Daniel was buried and where he had dropped his clothes. Once they arrived at the site, police moved in, and they arrested Brett Peter Cowan. They found a pair of shoes that matched Daniel Morcombe's, as well as several bones that DNA traced back to Daniel from a toothbrush from his home. There was also a unique pocket watch known to Daniel due to its engraving of Dan on the back, but it was never found. It turns out Brett Peter Cowan was part of a Mr. Big operation, a covert police tactic used by law enforcement to get suspects to admit to criminal activity. In it, police create a fictitious criminal organization and work to convince suspects they are moving up the chain. They build relationships, gain trust and confidence, all in effort of learning enough of specific crimes to finally land a conviction. None of these crimes that Cowan took part in in these previous months were real. They were all staged. Every single one of them. The tactic has been used hundreds of times in Canada, where it originated, and Australia, as well as New Zealand. It is prohibited in the United States and the United Kingdom, but it is a very large and expensive operation that began way back on the original flight to Perth for Brett Peter Cowan, and Fitzy was an operative assigned to make friends with a sadistic pedophile and murderer. Arnold's conversation was recorded and used as evidence, as Arnold was never a true identity. Cowan had never committed a single crime with this entire group. Idiot. Cowan's defensive team argued that Douglas Jackway was the real murderer, a known pedophile who had a blue sedan matching the original descriptions, as well as his physical frame matched the description of the man seen at the bus stop. Cowan's team maintained the detailed confession was coerced and details were force-fed to him by authorities. Also, they argued the confession was elicited through an undercover sting by police and it was inadmissible as evidence. But the jury did not buy it, and they found Cowan guilty, and he was convicted on murder, deprivation of liberty, child stealing, indecent treatment of a child under 16, and interfering with a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2031. It came to light that in 1993, a psychologist who examined Cowan after one of his many crimes determined that Cowan was a pathological liar, with low-level psychopathic features or mild psychopathy, indicating a severe lack of empathy. Cowan appealed his sentence to the Queensland Court of Appeal under Justice Margaret McMurdo, seeking to have his conviction overturned. On May 21, 2015, Cowan's appeal was dismissed. The Morcombe family began the Daniel Morcombe Foundation, which dedicates itself to educate children on personal safety issues and to inform children of the dangers of predators like Brett Peter Cowan. They found some good in the bad. Daniel Morcombe was finally laid to rest on December 7th, 2012, exactly 9 years after he went missing. It was a tragedy that destroyed an entire family and community, yet one they have parlayed into this Daniel Morcombe Foundation, which hopes to save lives of future children. Far too often in true crime cases, the names of the monsters are what is on the lips of those that follow the cases, when we should always reflect more on the victims. Daniel, by all accounts, was a sweet, thoughtful boy who was growing into a vulnerable and kind young man. This world lost a shining light that day. And if you must take away one thought from this case, let it be that. So that's what happened.
How do you hard transition away from this brutal tragedy?
I don't know. I do want to segue and start with the operation, right? So Cowan's a monster. We all agree. And if you don't, I dare you say it. But how do we feel about the operation itself? This Mr. Big operation.
I like it.
You like spending millions of tax dollars on this?
That's the thing I thought it was incredible the entire time looking into the story. They spent millions and millions of dollars on this whole investigation. They kept him going for several years to be able to get a full confession out of him. All of that is great. Does the end justify the means? And absolutely. It's a life that was lost, and it could have led to finding more lives in the meantime, too.
So the thing about it for me is I have no issue, and I'm happy that they spent millions of dollars to right a wrong that was made and find a way to provide the evidence necessary to put this person behind bars. However, it should also be noted it's stupid that it had to take that long and that much money, because had anybody listened early on, it could have been acknowledged and taken care of within weeks of his disappearance.
How so? Why do you say that? Why do you think that?
There was, and I watched this story. It was like an interview with the family and the detectives who worked on the case. And they had provided the evidence, the lead detective and his team had provided the evidence to like the main cop decision guy who was essentially overseeing the case. And
Technical term, main cop.
yep.
Guy.
Yep. I like this. Yep.
Yeah. And essentially they turned a blind eye to it. And even though they said this is, he provided a whole statement back in 2003 that was like, here is what you need, what steps you need to take to find Cowan and, lock him down for what he did and why he is listed as the number one suspect. And this guy was so fixated on other...
Daniel Jackway was the one they were really fixated on.
Yeah. And so they neglected all of that information that was presented very early on. Like within the first couple of weeks, they identified Brett as one of the prime suspects because his car was witnessed. There was somebody who said that he was standing there behind the kid when they drove past. There was like a lot of different things that would have been enough evidence for them to like tap his phone or to investigate his car or investigate all of these things. They took pictures of his tire marks. They like followed him. Like they had all this evidence, but the lead law enforcement in charge of it turned
Just say lead
turned
detective
away.
guy this time.
Dude at the head of the table?
Dude at the head of the table.
Boss man McGee.
And of course, that guy denies everything that was said. But what they did, it's so crazy because of this interview. And I can't remember when they did this interview, but when they looked into it, they actually found a file on a USB. And in that file, he had the original copy of the document that was provided that said, like, here are my recommendations and what I think you should do. And it showed that it had never been reopened or modified since 2003. And so it was more damning that now they covered it up because when they presented the information, they omitted all of the recommendations that pointed to Cowan.
Because they were too busy focused on Douglas Jackway.
Yeah. And so they tried to cover their tracks after he was making kind of a ruckus saying, like, I provided this stuff to you guys and you ignored it.
And at that point, it was too late and they needed to get evidence a different way.
So what a crazy, crazy situation that, what was it, 8 years plus could have been avoided of having this person on the streets had the people in charge heeded all of the advice and evidence provided to them to look at this other guy. Very, very sad and tragic case for sure. And the movie did not make it any more enjoyable.
We'll get to the movie, man.
You have so many feelings about the movie.
Yeah, the operation is insane. I've never heard, obviously I've heard of going undercover and pretending to be a criminal and da-da-da-da, but going to the lengths of an entire sting operation where multiple agents are involved and you fake crimes. Number one, okay, how disappointing if you think you're a cool, badass criminal to find out like you haven't been doing anything this whole time. Like you are not as sleek as you thought. What a bummer. But it is a great way to catch someone who refuses to admit to anything. People do not want to confess, especially people that have been dealing with the law for a long time. They know not to talk to the police. And here we say, okay, don't talk to the police, talk to the criminals. And that seems to work. And if you've listened to and I will make a recommendation, if you listen to the podcast Case File, there's a Daniel Morcombe episode. We don't normally recommend other podcasts, but this is one that I do recommend because they did have the actual recording of the full confession situation, and it's well worth listening to. So I would recommend that one, Case File. But it's a wild story. It's a wild story, and it's insane that it worked, and it's worked hundreds of times. I get why we don't use it here because it would definitely be entrapment here, I think. Other countries feel differently, I guess. But it is kind of entrapment. Because I could see fully. Now, in this situation, he led them to Bones. he led them to DNA. Like, where he led them was directly connected to Daniel Morcombe. Got him, dead to rights. But I could see someone who's trying to rise in the ranks of a criminal operation copying to something that they didn't do just for bragging points. So I can see the problem with it.
I think that's why it was so important for them for him to take them to the body, though. That's why.
Well, yeah, I get it.
Some of my looking into this, Australia has a slightly more tighter rules of the no body, no crime. Have they prosecuted? Has Australia prosecuted cases without a body? Sure, they have. Everybody has. For some reason, it's actually a lot more difficult because of the level of circumstantial evidence they would need, or the requirement of circumstantial evidence they would need to be able to run a case like this. So the fact that he was able to then take them to where the remains were made it more easier for them to take him down for this crime.
So is it ethical? A Mr. Big operation, is it ethical?
To take down a child rapist? Yup.
I'll take down any criminal.
Well, this is worse than just, I mean, if a guy steals a DVD player, I'm not too worried about him. I mean, I don't know about any criminal, but I get child rapist murderer. Yeah, we need him off the streets for sure. Where's the line stop though? Like, where does because you're talking, look, I'm just devil's advocate. If you're talking about so much taxpayer revenue, there's only so many of those you can do. And there's a lot of murders that are cold cases. What's the limit?
It's impossible to answer. The thing though is that, I mean, you mentioned that this is sort of like entrapment, but it's not entrapment, because isn't entrapment forcing somebody to do a crime and then punishing them for that crime? He's not being punished for any of the quote unquote things he never actually did as part of the Mr. Big crew. He's being punished for the crime that he actually did, but they just happened to get him to confess to it because it's so much easier to talk to another criminal, right?
Essentially, entrapment's a legal defense. It occurs when a cop or a state officer convinces somebody to commit a crime they would have not otherwise committed. So yeah, I guess it would not be entrapment because
so it's not entrapment.
Sure.
It still leads some legal gray areas because of the whole, he's trying to make himself look better in front of all these criminals. Now, it could be argued that if he's trying to make himself look better by saying, hey, I like little boys, that's why I'm a badass and I should come up the ranks, that's a terrible way to do it.
Yeah, usually they're not a big fan of that. That's why he was attacked in prison.
Yeah, well, I'm okay with that.
They threw boiling hot water on him, if you
Oh,
guys wanted to know.
gosh. I
Darn.
hope he's okay. I should be more empathetic, but I'm not. So
Also, Michael Condon is the sergeant who is the lead on that case that avoided all responsibility. If you wanted to know who's a real shitbag, that would be the guy.
So that's the lead head
detecting
guy?
The lead head guy. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, somebody had to focus on this case. They're like, we got him. There's this other guy though. This
I
guy
did a
should
lot
be held
of like
accountable.
extra other. I invested a lot of time through. It's funny because I was more invested through reading and watching YouTube videos of like interviews and cases and stuff like that. Or I mean, like little info things related to this case than I was the movie. But
And we'll come back to how the family feels about the movie after we talk about the movie. But I do want to mention the whole Daniel Morcombe Foundation. Good on them. To me, we've talked about this with John Walsh, how he took a tragedy and made it a positive, right? That's essentially what they're doing. And the idea of educating children about tactics that criminals use and pedophiles use and that sort of thing, to educate them so that they don't find themselves in dark situations, I think is a wonderful idea. And I'm glad that some positive elements came out of this. Now, the movie. So
the movie.
When it comes to the movie, 2022's The Stranger follows Henry Teague and Mark Frame, two men who meet on a bus almost as a stroke of fate. I bet you can see where this is going, right? If you probably, heard that 20 minutes but we just went through. These two men strike up a most unique friendship, one that leads to a calvacade of crime and decadence. But there is something more to this relationship, something lingering under the surface, and it's about to break free. The film was written and directed by Thomas M. Wright and starred Joel Edgerton and Sean Harris. Okay, it's a standalone film without any knowledge of the case. Amanda, what'd you think?
The floor is yours.
I was devastatingly bored through the majority of this film. It took me 3 attempts to finally get through it. I get this is a very bleak topic, but I felt like the entire thing was overly slow burn. We're doing like solid pans into a piece of equipment that's ringing, for example. Why do we need to spend 7 seconds panning into this when it could take 1 second to see that it's got an alarm going off? I don't know. There's just a lot of that in this movie, and I feel like it takes away from the level of impact that this story has, where it's just not, it just doesn't take me to the heart. And I'll say Joel Edgerton, obviously great performance. I don't take that away from him. Sean Harris, I wish I didn't have to watch him do this character because I was incredibly bored with him. He is who I struggled with most.
And he's
from the
normally a
cast.
very good actor. Like, he's a great bad guy. God, he's in Mission Impossible movies and stuff. I don't have a problem with his performance. I do think this is a very slow movie. I think it takes a while to get into it. And what I don't think I really cared for was I knew the Daniel Morcombe situation going into the movie, so I knew what it was and how it connected. So I knew it was just about the sting operation, right? But as I'm watching the movie, I feel like it took way too long for the audience to know Joel Edgerton was really a cop. Am I wrong about that? Do you guys feel differently about that? Or is that just...
Everything took a long time. Everything.
I don't feel that way about
Come
it.
to the movie's defense, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to come to the movie's defense because I actually enjoyed sitting down and watching this. Could it have been a little bit quicker pace?
Less than 2 hours, yeah.
Could they have actually buttoned up the ending because it did feel like they didn't know how to do the bend, how to end the movie? Sure. But about everything else I thought was fantastic. I thought it was well acted. I thought that the way that they told the story, so you start the story with him striking up this relationship with Paul, and Paul introduces him to Mark, and Mark then tells him, well, Paul's got to go, and you're like, all right, well, I mean, I don't really know and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, he's a cop. Because I didn't know what the story was all about going into this. There's not very often where I get to jump into a movie like this and not know where the story starts or what's going on. So I was able to go in here blind. And I like the way it did this whole, we're going to tell the story. We're going to rewind it a little bit and undo some of the knots, and so that you can see the underlying story that's happening. Now we're going to go forward some more and do it again. And I appreciated how much deeper we kept getting into the investigation and the layers of the investigation as we're moving along, because that kept me fascinated and more engrossed to the story. Again, could it be shorter? Sure. But I thought everyone acted beautifully. Sean Harris, I thought, was gross and uncomfortable to look at in all the ways he should be. The only thing I would have taken out is some of the family backstory for Joel Edgerton's character, Mark, because we didn't need any of that. But again, you want to create a character that has some depth. But that's my take.
Instead of spending so much time for the audience building tension in this dynamic between these two characters,
okay,
I feel like if they would have invested more if they wouldn't have made that a secret, that wouldn't have been a wow moment. There wouldn't be oh, wow, sure, that's so impactful. You could have made the impact of the film should have been around how horrific this guy is, not around, oh, this guy is a cop and it's undercover. I feel like it changes the intention behind the film. And I feel like that is where you lose the respect for Daniel, because then he's just a number.
I appreciate you, but I don't agree.
That's fine.
You are much better at this than I am on a much more often basis, but I don't agree with it. I just think the idea of introducing you to a bunch of criminals and then peeling the onion as we're going along to the point where you're like, oh no, he's the only real bad guy. I think that has a much greater impact, especially when you start seeing the layers of of the surrounding characters and what they're doing, and what they have to get accustomed to. And I think that's one of the reasons why they added the story of Mark and his kid, because here he is trying to be a good dad and be a good person and teach his son good things. But then he has to like deal with this guy who grabs him by the crotch for whatever reason.
I mean, look, I think there are elements to that could be okay. It's almost like you're trying to show, this is a good person who's being, in order to catch a horrible person, has to shed parts of their goodness, right? I don't think that's necessary. I think it is not very difficult to showcase that someone is a better person than a monster like Peter Cowan was. And I think it could have been done in different ways. Honestly, I don't think we needed that whole side plot with his son and whatnot, but that's just me. I would have preferred we continuously were focused on the case, and we just didn't even know. If you're going to try and make it a gotcha moment or a more impactful moment by doing that, then let it play out until the end. Let us find out when he finds out that he's a cop. That works way better, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I can agree with that. I respect you as a person, and you're much better at this than I am. And actually, that was a good idea.
So Amanda, what John's saying is we're both better at this than him. So I don't know if he's coming back.
I know my place.
Just saying. It's weird. What the movie got right and did it respect the victims, and that's where we get into a bit of a gray area. I will say that I do like that this was not naming Daniel Morcombe to begin with. It does not depict the crime. It does not use his name. And director Wright told Variety, quote, "I couldn't presume to know anything of the experience of that family, but I could see that there was a story about empathy and making meaning in the wake of violence, not violence itself." So, that's his explanation for why they made the film. But my gosh, the family felt completely different. But let's get the film company's side of it. According to The Guardian, Seesaw Films said, quote, "They made this film out of the deepest respect for the Morcombes. And that's why it was decided that Daniel's name would not be mentioned, nor would it depict any details of the murder. And, quote, "It tells the story of the unknown police professionals who committed years of their lives and their mental and physical health to resolve this case and others like it. When the film was first in development, the producers approached the family to make them aware of the film. They declined to be involved. It is a decision that we continue to respect." Fair enough. The father of Daniel, Bruce Morcombe, felt very differently. He called for Australians to boycott The Stranger. He told Perth's CPR radio at one point that filmgoers should, quote, "save their $20 on a film ticket and instead donate it to the Daniel Morcombe Foundation." I totally get that. And he also said, quote, "If you've got any conscience at all, please don't go and watch this movie." Well, I feel bad, Bruce, because we already did. But he also said, quote, "It is a terrible tale that glorifies a horrific incident, the murder of our son. And this film and the media attention around this film is, quote, a trigger for all those untidy emotions that you try and suppress day by day." And then furthermore, Bruce and Denise shared a public statement on the film saying, quote, "It's appalling storyline, ignores our family's pain, and chooses to profit from 13-year-old Daniel Morcombe's death. In a twisted way, it also provides oxygen to a sadistic beast by notarizing his evil acts. Individuals who make money from a heinous crime are parasites." I just, we don't make money off this podcast. But there's no argument with the father of a victim as far as I'm concerned. He wins. Like he has a right to feel exactly how he feels. But how do we feel? Because this is the unique situation, right? We watch true crime. We listen to true crime. We are all guilty of this if it is a moral crime. I
think it's tough for any of us to say when we don't have that same experience. Like, I couldn't even imagine something happening to my kid and then seeing it represented on screen or inferred to on screen for the entire world to see because it's on Netflix. So it's hard to compare and say, what is the right or moral thing in this situation. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is it's a gray area because they don't specify this individual kid and they don't try to make inferences as to how the parents or the family feels. But at the same time, then you're kind of omitting that. as well. I mean, the director took a very different take on this story and didn't want to focus on
the crime.
And so I think that inherently makes it makes it more vague. It's not specific to the family. And I think if a family who's grieving is going to see a film about their child's kidnapping and death, then they're probably going to want to be involved and, here's what really happened. And unfortunately now for reflection, that interview that I mentioned, I think it was in 2023, so it was after this film came out. So that's now information that skews the way that even this sting operation went down. So for the family, they may have also recognized that, hey, it wasn't this complicated. Like, we knew who the guy was a long time ago.
And, well, I think it sounds like, according to Bruce's comments, he didn't appreciate, basically, you gave 2 hours to the guy that killed our son.
And none to the son.
Yeah, none to the son. I get the respect. We kept his name out of it. We kept all names out of it. Cowan's name's not mentioned. It's a different name. But we kept the names out of it. Like, it's not connected, even though they mentioned the case in multiple media interviews. But there's no face of Daniel, really. Like, there's no heart or soul to the boy that everything revolves around. And I do think that's a miss in some respects. I do think that he deserved something, since it's his legacy that you're basing this on. And then you're giving a couple hours to this monster and making it seem like, hey, he's just living this cool criminal life, until the end, and you find out the horrible things he does. Okay. But still, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's such a gray area. It's such a great area. And I can't imagine what it's like to be in his shoes. I would probably feel the exact same if I was him. But on the same token, I also watch a lot of true crime, so maybe I wouldn't feel the same. Maybe I'd feel differently. I don't know.
If we spent the majority of the movie with the main villain, right? If we followed him while he's clothes shopping, followed him while he's figuring out what he's going to do with his life, I would feel pretty much the same way. But really, we don't start seeing those sorts of areas of his life until Joel Edgerton's character is a part of it. Taking him clothes shopping, going to his house finally, all these other things. That's the only times we start seeing him more deeply. Whereas when we start the movie, sure, we start with his face immediately, but it's pretty much like a handoff from him to Paul, then to Joel Edgerton's character, Mark, and then we stay with Mark the entire time. I feel very much like this is more of the police story or the investigation story than it is the story of the perpetrator of the crime.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is for sure. I'm just saying I get where Bruce is coming from, because essentially you are kind of, giving him a lot more screen time than he probably feels that monster deserves, right? And this is where you get into the conflict of doing true crime stories without any family's involvement. And there's a catch-22 if you do have family's involvement, because then it's only skewed a lot of times to their point of view. And sometimes there are two points of view to every story, but I'm not saying there is one here, but I'm just saying it is a very gray area. And we all, listening, watching, etc., enjoy true crime, probably because we're fascinated by crime and want to understand the criminal mind so that we are prepared in our own lives. And I do think the Daniel Morcombe story can help educate children, as the foundation is doing, to just being wise to manipulative tactics, because I think everybody has that gut feeling, especially that listen to true crime. A lot of people have that, well, I would never do this. I would never do that. I would never get in the car. I would not. You don't know. You just don't know. And kids are naive. They're naive to the world. It's a completely different environment. And a lot of people are naive to the world in general. If you might grow up sheltered. You might grow up in a very nice neighborhood. You might grow up in a great area where nothing usually happens. Then you go to an area where things happen, and, you don't see the negative in everything. So it's just a gray area. I don't know why I went on that little tangent, but I did. Hope it made sense to somebody.
I'm sure somebody got it.
Okay, so what the movie got wrong or left out and wasn't worth it. Does it benefit the film or the case that the filmmakers did focus solely on the sting operation and not the actual murder? Taking Bruce's stance out of it, Does it hurt the film not showing Daniel and giving him some screen time so we know what's going on?
I think they tried to do so, and they could have done it a little bit better than what they did, which is to show the other investigation into the murder, which they not only did they show the start of the sting operation or the Mr. Big operation, but they also showed the beginnings of the Daniel murder. It was somewhat of the kid in the story, but it is there. I think it would have been more impactful if they would have done more with that than they did, but they tried the best they could, I think, with what they were trying to do. Because I think they were being very purposeful by not raising too much of a connection to the original story. I think it's just a misstep in that one area.
I think you lose, again, some of that impact because part of the story is when you think about Daniel, he's going to get Christmas presents for his family. When I think about that part of the story, somehow it makes it even harder to hear like what happened to him, just knowing how sweet and genuine this little boy was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're not connecting with the individuals of the story or the families who are experiencing it, I think it's easier for you to separate your emotions from it, because then it just turns into, well, we're hunting a killer or we're hunting someone down versus we're hunting down a child murderer.
Fair enough. I still would have liked to have seen flashes rather than spending time with Mark's kid, who I, no offense, don't care about, and nothing against that police officer, if that was actually a true kid or relationship, whatever. I would have liked some flashes of the victim of the story. Obviously, they're not trying to paint it as it's not Daniel Morcombe. It's a different character, but it's very similar to Morcombe's situation, whatever. Whoever the victim is, showcase them in some way, whether the cop is reflecting on the child based on interviews or something like that. However you do it, just give that face some space. That really impacts the audience. So we have a stake in this, like a real stake in bringing this son of a bitch down. Does that make sense? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So that's The Stranger. Amanda, you want to go watch this again?
No, I wish I could be a stranger to the movie.
You know what? I bet that is probably the best review that Bruce Morcombe has probably heard about the film. So I'm sure he would appreciate that. It sounds like, John, you really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was too slow, and it sounds like Amanda's on, like, it's kind of like we're all on different ends of the spectrum, I guess. I'm in the middle. You guys are on either side, is what it sounds like.
Sounds like an Aaron sandwich.
Yeah. Hey.
Icky.
Gross. That was very unnecessary and a good time to head out the door. So if you enjoyed this podcast, share the show on your social media outlets and give us a review in your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is. Just give us a review, iHeartRadio, because you are the best source of promotion for Inspired by a True Story. It really, really does help the podcast. And again, thanks to everybody that's listening, and thanks to everyone that tries to get the word out and get more people listening, because it helps the show. Now, go tell your true crime maniac friends about us. And thanks again for listening to Inspired by a True Story. Let's keep those artists honest. Is there anything else about this we should talk about?
It's so slow, but good.
Oh, it's amazing that now you want to acknowledge that.
No, I did. I already admitted it's slow.
Amanda.
Not enough.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling
I'm sorry.
enough.
Exactly.
What is enough for you guys to be like, I already said, like, so I have a condition called turtle itis.